So where were we? I think we've made a good case in this long series of videos for the fact that we need to be knowledgeable about the true extent of the threat that is emerging in the world in food terms to ourselves. We must empower ourselves with that knowledge. And we must learn how to cope. How do you cope if you lived, as I began this whole story, in the years following the great darkness that covered the earth in 536 AD? How did you cope? I don't have all of the answers. I really don't. I mean, part of the reason why the plague, the bubonic plague, the plague of Justinian, came into Europe in the year 541 AD was because the Europeans were desperately importing food from more southerly latitudes. Because the first volcano that darkened the earth, of the four that I described to you, between 535 and 547, there were four. The first one was in northern latitudes, and it covered mostly the north. Because of technical reasons that I don't understand and cannot explain to you, the ones in more tropical, apparently there were one or two in tropical regions, those, somehow the ash and the aerosols covered the tropics and the north. I don't know exactly how it works. But these guys were frantically, after the first couple of volcanoes, or the first one, the world goes dark, they can't grow any crops, there's crop failure everywhere, people are dying, famine, it's absolute pitch dark night. They do successfully manage to import food from more southerly latitudes, and one of the explanations given for the arrival of the bubonic plague, the plague of Justinian, from the rats on board the ships it was from rats on board the ships infected with the flea that is infected with the bacillus, Yensia pestis, was because they were getting grain from as far away as Ethiopia to keep Europe alive. It was coming down the Nile River. They were also getting grain from Egypt. So if you go up the Nile, you get modern day Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. And on those from those regions, Ethiopia, the Ethiopian highlands, Sudan, and Egypt were supplying grain to Europe. But apparently, one or other boffin reckons that the likelihood is that the bacillus that infected the fleas that infected the rats on the ships came from Ethiopia. I don't know. So what do we in South Africa do? I don't know. I mean, obviously, you've got to think about chickens. Obviously, you've got to think about growing your own veggies, growing your own herbs. And I put it to you, as a non-expert, that you've got to hoard staples and you will never regret it. I put it to you that after this long series of videos that runs now to, what is the time? Perhaps an hour and a half. I forget when I started, but roughly. That each and every one of us has to begin going into this thing with something like, say, 100 kilograms of rice, for the sake of a number. Now immediately people say, well, rice is, in my shop it's 20 Rand a kilogram, and fantastic is 40 Rand for 2 kgs. That's prohibitive. I can't afford 2,000 Rand and I've got a family of 5, that's 10,000 Rand. I tell you that you can. I tell you that if you begin at the beginning, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And these are steps that we have to take. There is no getting away from it. And I'm not saying this because I've got piles and piles and piles of food preparations. I don't, because I'm a bachelor, therefore I'm slack about such things. If I had a wife, more's the pity, I've never been married. If I had a wife, guaranteed I'd be 100 miles further ahead, because that's what women bring to that scenario. Bachelors in this regard are notorious. It's not an excuse, but it is the reason. So I'm not speaking down to anybody. I'm not looking down upon anybody. I'm not holier than thou in this regard. But that doesn't make me right. I am as wrong as you if I don't begin with the simplest solution that I can. Now, many of you who are Afrikaans speaking, particularly, but not only, are going to say, but what about mealie meal? I'll answer you in a second. It's a little bit chilly. I'm going to put a jacket on. I should begin by explaining to you that I grew up on the south coast of Natal, and I went to university for 2 years after school, got fed up with it, dropped out, and went to the army. And in the army, for the first time in my life, I tasted mealie pap. Krimmel pap, whatever pap, the first time I'd ever tasted it. And nobody I knew ate pap. I had heard of mealie meal and mealie pap because the blacks used to eat it. So if you had a live-in maid, as we did for a few years, they would make that. But people I knew other than a worker, kind of. Or people, factory work, I don't know. But people I could say, oh, I know that person. Nobody ate it. And so when I suggest rice, people ask me for this kind of advice all the time. Often, Afrikaans speakers who have a far stronger tradition of eating mealie meal will say, what about mealie meal? I'm not against mealie meal, I have some, but its huge disadvantage is if it spoils, you can't rectify it. Whereas with rice, you can at least partially rectify it. So rice doesn't sour very easily, it doesn't get mold very easily, which mealie meal can do. If rain just looks at mealie meal sideways, the game is on. The same with flour, as you might expect. Wheat flour, bread flour, cake flour. But rice is a bit more robust, if that's the word, in those terms. But let's say you get weevils. You've got 100 kgs of mealie meal and 100 kgs of rice. And you get weevils in both. Now you say, well, Simon, this is not mold. This is not age. This is weevils. Yeah, but you can wash the rice. You can't wash the mealie meal. You can neither wash out the weevils, nor can you wash out the stool, the scat, the poo of the weevils from mealie meal, whereas you can from rice. I'm not suggesting that it wouldn't be slightly harmed. I am saying that you can rectify it to whatever extent, whether it's 10% 10% is better than nil. You can do nil rectification of mealie meal. 0. How do you wash meat or the poo, weevils or the poo out of mealie meal? So I'm not saying you must become a rice fan. I'm just saying if you want, after this long series of videos, some practical advice on this subject that I tell you is going to smash us just months from now. Smash us, utterly smash us to smithereens. Start with some rice. You can manage. 10,000 rand doesn't grow on trees. But aim in a direction, maybe you'll get 5,000 rands worth of rice or 2,500 rands worth of rice. Where does that put you compared to the next person? I've told this anecdote before. When I was a kid, my main sport was life-saving. I grew up in Amanzimtoti. The main beach at Amanzimtoti is called Nyoni Rocks Beach, Bird Rocks Beach. At the time that I was a teenager, doing life-saving as a sport and volunteering on Sundays and public holidays to guard the beaches, Nyoni Rocks Beach had still then held, it's long since changed very, very much. Nyoni Rocks Beach is no longer even a remote contender due to the success of the Natal Anti-Shark Measures Board netting system. But it possessed then the highest rate of shark attack in the world and had done for many years. And it was known as a notoriously dangerous beach, so much so that at the 1974, my dad was there, World Life-Saving Championships. My dad told me that the Australians and Americans flatly refused, when they discovered the surf conditions in which they were meant to compete, flatly refused to compete. And the location of the competition had to be changed. I don't remember the exact details. Notoriously dangerous just to swim there. And now it's got the highest rate of shark attack officially in the world. But as young teenage boys, you'll do anything that's, and we, on a few occasions, swam out to the shark nets. Let me tell you, I hitchhiked alone as a 22-year-old boy to Zanzibar and then to Ethiopia. All told, alone, something like 4 times as far as the equator. And then once with 2 friends. I have known moments of fright and scariness. I have dived on many occasions with sharks. I'm not talking about friendly little ragged-toothed sharks. Many occasions with man-eating sharks. I've never known anything remotely as frightening. Sorry, I thought somebody walked past my window. As swimming to the shark nets at Amanzimtoti. Because as you swim, the water gets a sort of eerie depth to it. You can't see far down, but you can feel that there is a great obscure depth beneath you. And the perception of distance from the shore becomes reversed. So when you're standing on the shore and you're looking at the buoys of the shark nets, they look like they're that far away. When you get to the buoys of the shark nets and you look back at the shore, it looks like it's that far away. There's nothing as terrifying, not in my life experience, as terrifying as that. And we would all start to panic. And sooner or later somebody would say, invariably, on every occasion, today I don't have to be the fastest swimmer to survive. I only have to be the second slowest. Meaning if we see a shark fin, the nets are staggered. They're like that. So there are gaps between them. The idea being like an Amazonian fish trap that we've all seen on National Geographic. Do you remember the series Die Oerwoud? Die Oerwoud. Oh, gee, I love that series. The idea being that the shark is meant to come in, panic, not be able to figure out the gaps, and swim straight into the net. So the nets always catch the sharks on the way out, and you know that you're swimming with sharks there. This is Nyoni rocks. If we spot a fin, a dorsal fin, I don't have to be the fastest swimmer, only the second slowest. And I'll tell you, remember this story for the rest of your life, or come up with your own similar parable or anecdote or metaphor or simile, the one that works for you, to remind yourself that every little bit of effort that you make to get basic staples in place for the next year is worth it. Because it puts you ahead of the next person, and sadly, life is a game of competition. You compete from the first day. You compete to survive. In the absence of modern medicine, have you any idea what is the infant mortality rate? Guys, it's big numbers. Just today, I read something that I learned about 30, almost exactly 33 years ago. The average age of a Roman citizen, and this is proven by archaeology, was 28 years when Rome was at the zenith of its achievement, when it had aqueducts left, right, and center, when it was the place of civilization. 28 years old, that's it, you're done. That's if you don't factor in infant mortality. Not if you do, if you do not. I don't remember how they work it out, but I think it's if you don't die in the first 4 years, then you fall into what becomes the rest of the average. So even without infant mortality, it's pitiful. Can you imagine if you included infant mortality? Maybe the average life expectancy would be 21 or 22. I don't know. I haven't done the mathematics. 23, 24, I don't know. You compete to be born. You compete to get through the most vulnerable years. You compete in the education system in South Africa and all around the world. You compete to get a job. You compete to get ahead. You compete because everything is based on averages. Pensions are based on algorithms. You might say, well, I'm not competing against anybody. I'm just paying my pension. I'm doing my thing. You are corresponding to the algorithms, and the algorithms are based on the averages of the society. Have you ever thought of that? It's fact, it's mathematics. So you are competing against average age, average performance, average income, average savings, average pension contribution, average retirement age, average health issues, perhaps prior to the time of your retirement, average disability. You are competing 17 ways from Sunday every moment. So it's not about doing in your neighbor, but you have to compete. You have to endeavor to at least not be the last of the teenage boys from Kingsway High School being voluntary surf lifesavers on a Sunday afternoon, swimming out to the shark nets and hoping to return without being mauled by a shark at the world's supposedly most dangerous beach, both for sharks and for everything else, as I explained about the Australian and American lifesavers. That's it, guys. I think I've made the point, and I think that in days and weeks and months to come, we're going to more succinctly make salient points about various developments in this emerging global famine crisis, and I'm going to keep you informed with those videos. But for now, I hope that this sermon, you didn't feel that it was haranguing or hectoring, that it has been helpful to those of you who were able to endure blooming 7 or 8 episodes, whatever it has been. Thank you very much for watching, and we wish you nothing but the very, very best for the tough times that lie ahead of us. Goodbye, and God bless you, Sakelanders.